I'd be home by 9. Hell, I tell her that most of the time. Whoa, baby, don't know, won't hurt her too much. Whoa, I'll tell her where, but I won't say what. Oh, now I'm dancing, oh, I'm dancing. I'm dancing with the devil. Oh, now I'm dancing, oh, I'm dancing. I'm dancing with the devil. Oh, pour me a whiskey, oh, barkeep. Oh, pour me for more so I...
Welcome back to the Otter Creek in Rio Grande, and the fifth and hopefully I can predict the last video of the Dabler Mill and Supply Company. I'm down to the last probably 25% of what's left to do on this, and I'm going to get right to it, take pictures as I go, and stop in like I always do and give you feedback on how things went. Stairs are put in, and it was pretty straightforward. Now, I misremembered the instructions because I'm one of those guys that reads through the instructions once, looks at the pictures, and then just goes for it. And the platform here should have been put in before the stringers, and I could have swore the instructions said the supports were first, then the stringers, and then the platform. And so what happened was I kind of forced this outside stringer to where the support is right in here, and because that's where it interfaces. And so by the time I did put the platform in, this outside stringer, because it was already glued here, didn't interface properly there. And so the further up the stairs you get, the more the treads are running downhill to the front. I think some of that is in the engineering of this particular stringer, and the instructions are specific that it should be on the outside, and I got that right. But you know, you've got a slope here, so this particular stringer, I'm guessing maybe I also pushed this in a little too far. I don't know. Again, it's just kind of weird because it should fit here, This was level and straight. This was level and straight. But the important thing is that this particular stringer at the top should interface with the platform more so than this here. You might end up with a gap there, I suppose, but I'll live with it. But it is noticeably wonky up there at the top, but it'll be okay. On to the next step, which is the elevator on the back side of the model. The elevator is mostly complete. I've got a couple more things I need to do to it before I'm ready to glue it. And one of them is to put this in. And I've got a lot of the little metal detail parts. I want to paint those all up at the same time because they're all add-on pieces kind of at the end. As far as the main structure goes for the elevator, pretty easy to put together. There's just one thing to keep in mind when you go to do it, is that all four of those pieces to a certain degree can be put together in a incorrect mirror image. So pay real close attention to the bottom of the structure itself and make sure that everything is going to line up with the angle of the roof. If you pay attention to that, you'll have no issues. The other thing that was really a pain about it was the ladder, and you can tell by looking at it that it's quite delicate. And what they do is they provide this, which is a peel and stick, and it's all of the ladder rungs. And then you've got these little notches right here that the runners go in. And then you're supposed to press into the ladder and into your runners. You're supposed to press the rungs in. and then glue on the outside and then cut on the outside, which is great in theory. The problem is that the rungs don't overlap the outside of the runners. And it would work really well if that's the way they would have done it. If the ladder, if you had more material hanging on the outside of the two runners, then you could easily get them to put in. There was more than once during the process I almost wadded everything up and threw it in the trash, but patience persevered, and I did get it put together. One of the biggest issues with it was that you have to take the peel and stick off, which I'm not even sure is even necessary. And then when you were doing that, then anytime you touched it at all, the whole damn thing came up on your thumb, and it wasn't a pleasant process. It did go, and a good idea, not well executed in my opinion. Other than that, I think I'm ready to go on to the grain bin. A little in progress on the grain bin. The instructions say that this is the most tedious part of the build, and so they kind of saved it for last, and it's difficult. Now, I'm not going to disagree, but the biggest issue with this, in my opinion, is just the delicate nature of the material that you're working with. And just kind of maneuvering this around as you're putting things together and whatnot, you could catch your pinky going the wrong way or something and possibly break it. And also, the glue that you use, this is the peel and stick is what this is supposed to go on to, but you can see there's other places where there is no peel and stick. And so I used matte medium to reinforce the peel and stick, and that's also what I used in all of the corners here as just kind of a way of shoring up and making things work well. And so far it hasn't been particularly difficult. It's just a matter of how easily it can be broken. And as a matter of proof, there's one little wall section right here that I broke, but I did that working on the louvers. And I can't recall if I discussed the louvers in the first video when I built a bunch of them, but they're not difficult either. Tedious is a good word. The difference between the louvers for this build, and there's 7 of them that are specific to the grain bin, is that on all of the other wall sections, you're dealing with, I don't know, probably 3 millimeter thickness walls. So when you put these runners in, they fit into the wall and they fit pretty solid. And then the louvers themselves go in pretty easy. I don't recall cussing at all when I built the louvers for all of the other wall sections. With this stuff, because it's so thin, when you put those runners into the windows, they'll fold out on you and come right back out. That was a little frustrating, and that's how I broke this section right here. Is I started using this as the template to build the first one, and all I did was accidentally go in. I think I put a louver in and it popped out of the window, and I went in to grab the louver and I just squeezed like that with my tweezers and broke that section. So what I figured is this is the wall section you ought to use for all of the 5 windows that go on the long sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I built every one of them in this, and I think I also left it in the sprue. And then I went ahead and used both of these at the same time and kind of bounced back and forth between for the 2 that go in those. And, the trick is getting that first one in and letting it completely dry before you try and put the other 4 louvers in. If you let that dry, it becomes 10 times easier to deal with. If it's not solid yet and you go in with a second one and this one's still wet and can move around and you get any kind of glue here, there, you'll pull it up and then your runners will go sideways, and just let it dry and be patient and bounce back and forth between the others. Once that first one's dry, the other 4 go in pretty easy. So haven't decided exactly what colors this are going to be. I think I'm going to go with a wood grain on this, and I'll probably go ahead and continue with the same dark green or black green Tamiya color that I've used on every other louver. I don't know, I might think about it a little bit more. We'll see how it turns out. Speaking of fragile, I went to put the bottom pieces on here, the grain bin, and I hadn't even realized that this piece was already broken off, and I didn't even realize it, and it broke off in the sprue. You can see that there's a little tab there. I have no recollection. One of these was already kind of broken out of the sprue before I ever messed with it, and I think it was this one, and I didn't catch that was there. Hopefully I can glue that on and it'll be okay. But sometimes that happens when you get things out of the box. They're already popped out of the sprue, and I suspect that may have already been broken. more progress on the grain bin. I'm about to get it buttoned up, and I thought I would point out something that was a little frustrating. And the instructions call to put in these pieces here that are, I guess, structural pieces for the actual grain bin before you put in any of the legs. Now, it does say in the instructions you can do this after, but it's more difficult. So what I found out is these pieces are supposed to interface with this cross member here, this big cross member, and it's over-designed, in my opinion. They've cut out an extra notch in this piece to accept these pieces. And they provide this as a reference to where those pieces are supposed to go. Use it as a guide, I think the instructions said, but you have no idea where this piece is supposed to go. I still don't really know exactly how it interfaces in here at all. And you can see it's also notched out for those pieces. But laterally, you don't know where this is supposed to fit in this area without those pieces there. So you really just, there's a lack of information in the instructions and pictures, in my opinion. And what I ended up having to do, if I remember which one it was, one of them fit. The other one did not. And I had to sand the crap out of one of these to get it to fit in there, which is not that big of a deal. But I guess all this to say is I don't think that putting these in after the legs would be more difficult than trying to get these to fit in if you got these put in incorrectly by putting them in first. I think you would be better off, in my opinion, to go ahead, put your legs on, put this piece on, because the way this is laser cut, you actually have a place where these pieces are supposed to interface. But then you also have to remember that those pieces also are supposed to interface with these little notches here. So, it's hard to say because I didn't do it that way, but I think that would be a better way of doing it. And again, it's all extremely fragile. I'm hoping that I don't end up breaking either of the peaks on the roof before I get the roof put in. Let me try and do a little better job of explaining what I was talking about. So now that I've got this other piece put in, I can see what the instructions was trying to tell me. But you know, when you look at these instructions, even if you read them, sometimes it's just, you're seeing an exploded view, and until you physically start putting things together, it doesn't make sense all the time. So there's notches here and here that accept this runner right there. But they want you to put this runner in before either of these two pieces. And so if you don't get that put in right, none of your notches are going to line up. Now this one, I was lucky enough that it did go without a lot of alteration. But, you know, a strategy would be, you know, kind of make sure you know where this one goes, which it goes flush to the outside of the laminate that you put on there. And if you did the two outsides, you could interlace, focus, this piece without gluing it onto the two outside pieces, and then figure out where exactly these four pieces on either side needed to lay. Another strategy is I think you could probably glue on the outside legs, making sure you knew which one was which because they are stair-stepped. And then you could lay this piece in. You could glue this piece in, I believe, on either side of the four outside legs, and then you'd be able to lay this in without gluing, lay that in without gluing, and then glue these 4 pieces in. Again, they could have made this interface so much easier by not trying to notch out anything. It just too fiddly in my opinion. I ended up going in and sanding back a lot of this piece, and it should fit in fairly easy now if I can do it on camera. Nope. There. So there you go. That's probably been one of the fiddliest things about the kit besides the ladder. Everything else has been pretty good. All right, I found another little thing that needs to be discussed probably. So in step 18, it tells you to glue in the roofs here for this. And to be fair, I didn't glue them in there. I glued them in much later. But then when you get to step 46 and it talks about fitting the grain bin into the holes here, it tells you that there's a piece that you put underneath here, and it says to glue it to the underside of the roof. Well, it's impossible because you've already glued the roof in, which may actually be a good thing. I don't know. But so what I found is that these holes that are pre-supplied in the roof material here did not line up hardly at all with the legs on the grain bin. Now, it's not terrible. I was probably a half a leg off on this one and then nearly a full leg off on that one. So I've just been slowly sanding with a small file, filing these out to get them to where they'll work by pinching in the legs just a little bit. And so I was test fitting back and forth, making sure that it was all going to work good. And I dropped the grain bin right square dab on top of the peaks of the roofs, busted both of the peaks of the roofs. This one is currently drying up from getting glued back on. This other one, the peak of it is busted in 2 different places. So story's still out as to whether or not I'm going to get that to where it's going to look good or not. I guess we'll just have to see. But I'm trying not to let my emotions take too much control of what I've got going on here, because to me this is too simple. And it's not like my legs are not square. I mean, they might be off a touch, but they are not off like a whole leg hole off up here at the top. So just keep that in mind. I know the video's getting long, but I suspect this will be the video that most people will want to watch anyway because it will show the completed model. My final thoughts on the grain bin, you know, as stated previously, I feel like they kind of over-engineered some of the pieces, could have been put together a little more simplistically, in my opinion. Now, this structure and the elevator, which is back here on the back side of the elevator house, those two structures can be built independently of the rest of the structure. And because they tell you to put these roofs on, I think in step 18, and then there's supposed to be a piece, two pieces actually, that go on the underneath side of that roof. That way your legs have a positive stopping point when you insert it into the roof. Of course, they don't mention these pieces at all in step 18. Step 46 is when they first tell you about these pieces. Just an oversight in the instructions, I figure, is the only thing. So if I were to build this again, I would not put any roofing material on any of this, as there's three different pieces here. Just leave them to last. You could build this first if you wanted to, but it doesn't really matter. But for sure, I would build the grain bin, test fit it into the roof, making sure your legs interface with the 8 holes that go to it. And then I think I would for sure glue these on. You know, and then once you get these glued in, then think about your lighting, because that was one of the reasons I couldn't come in under the underneath side, is because of the way my wires run through there. Just that, and you've also got these platforms in here that you can't really reach into very well at all. But for sure, hold off on doing anything with this roof piece until after you build this. I think you would be well ahead of the game just to do that, because I think that process will be a lot easier, because you might need to sand back all 8 of these holes in one way or another, and you wouldn't want to sand that if you've already glued these in. So test fit. Once this goes into those holes easily, then glue these into the bottom of this roof, then take your grain bin back off, put on your roofing material, glue your roof in, then you can start messing with the placement of the grain bin. I think that's kind of an oversight in how the instructions proceed forward, you know, in their explanation of things. I just think that kind of did a miss there. So I think I'm now on to the awnings and front porch. And there it is, about as complete as it's going to get at the moment. I guess what you would say at the 95% mark. There's still things that will need to be done as a finished scene. I do plan on adding some exterior lights, some overhead lighting in this area. And this place needed a lot of electricity, so I think somewhere on the very back side, I will need a utility pole, at least one utility pole, maybe one on either the front and back of the building. Just a lot of little things, feed sacks, crates inside of the different door openings. And I will say that's something that if I had it to do again, I would have taken the extra time to go ahead and get some crates and some boxes and put those in before gluing the roofs. So if you're building it, that's something you might consider if you want anything on top of the docks inside the structure. Now, I don't know if you noticed, because I know some of you probably just skipped to the end, but I did add a dock and a wall to this particular structure so that you didn't see, the clapboard on the far wall there. And it will definitely need some crates in there. What else did I do? Now, this building right here, it does have a light, but I'm going to leave it wild for now. Of course, nothing is glued, but I am going to leave it flexible enough. I don't want to put a hole through the plywood until I know for sure that's where it's going to land. Now, the lighting. One of the things that, like if I turn off the lights right now, there is a little bit of light leakage. And I don't know that I can point it out, but it's up in the corner there where the elevator house and the main structure come together in that corner by the door in there. There's a little bit of light leakage there. And I'm trying to remember, there might be another spot or two that's a little bit that are kind of difficult to deal with on the outside of the building. So that's another thing to consider before you put the roofs on. Any place where you join that you're going to have light, you might address on the inside of the building instead of waiting till the outside of the building like I did. But, the reality there is 95% of the time I'm going to be operating, there will be at least this much light, if not more. And so that leakage doesn't really affect anything too much. So, final thoughts about the actual structure. Very well put together, fairly easy to build, very time consuming if you want to, do more than just slap some paint on and glue it together. If you want the extra stuff on the inside of the building and a little bit of weathering in the process, then yeah, it's going to take a while. And other than the few things that I've already mentioned, about how the grain bin fits into the roof there, and there were a couple other little things here and there. The ladders were a little tricky. It really went together well, as well as any other structure I've ever built. So, American Model Builders Dabler Mill and Supply Company is down to the final 5%, and that's probably where it's going to be for a while. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in future episodes of the Otter Creek and Rio Grande. I am going to get back to bench work and track work and try and get Hellgate up and running. We'll see you around.
Oh, it felt so good. It felt good at the time. It felt good at the time.
That's why I say.